Hello everyone! Today's video will cover 17 chess tips for beginners. Let's get started. Tip number 1. Develop your pieces in the following order: pawn, knight, and bishop. Then, castle and develop your queen afterward. Tip number 2. Avoid moving the same piece repeatedly without a clear, justified purpose. Tip number 3. Do not fall for your opponent's baited pawn offers during the opening, especially when playing black. Although capturing such a pawn might give you a one-pawn advantage, that pawn is essentially poisoned. Accepting it can leave you vulnerable to a swift checkmate due to a lack of proper development. Remember, the primary goal of the opening is to develop your pieces quickly and efficiently. Tip number 4. Absolutely avoid developing your queen too early, as doing so will expose her to relentless pursuit by your opponent. Tip 5. Attack the center. Remember, the central squares are crucial. They control strategic positions that facilitate both rapid attacks and effective defense. Tip 6. Always think carefully before advancing a pawn. Since pawns can only move forward and never retreat, any misstep is irreversible. Once a pawn is placed in a vulnerable position, it becomes extremely difficult to salvage. Tip 7. Keep in mind that while an isolated pawn in the center might be powerful in the middle game, it typically becomes a liability in the end game. Tip 8. If you hold a spatial advantage, avoid exchanging pieces because your well-positioned forces are exerting significant control. Conversely, if your opponent has the space advantage, look to exchange pieces to neutralize that edge. Tip 9. Always play with a plan. Even a flawed plan is better than having no plan at all and wandering aimlessly. Tip 10. Knights are most effective when positioned in the center, whereas bishops perform best on the outskirts of the center. When exchanging pieces, prioritize keeping your knights in central positions. Tip 11. There's much debate about the relative strength of knights versus bishops, as they are valued equally in points. In my view, when there are few pawns on the board, a bishop is typically stronger than a knight. Conversely, in pawn-rich positions, the knight often outperforms the bishop. Tip 12. Two bishops generally outperform a combination of one bishop and one knight, or even two knights, since knights alone rarely force a checkmate. While a bishop paired with a knight can be effective, delivering checkmate with them is considerably more challenging compared to the swift mating patterns available with two bishops. Tip 13. Rooks are most powerful when placed on open files. Tip 14. Two rooks are usually stronger than a single queen. Tip 15. In endgame scenarios, if you are down in pawns relative to your opponent, avoid exchanging pieces. Keeping your pieces on the board offers counterattacking opportunities should your opponent falter. Tip 16. In endgames where each side has a bishop on opposite colored squares, if your opponent has an extra pawn, the game will typically draw. Tip 17. In the endgame, rooks are exceptionally potent when placed on the 7th and 8th ranks for white, and on the 1st and 2nd ranks for black, as these positions allow them to launch powerful attacks against the opponent's king and pawns. Remember to apply these tips to enhance your chess skills, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.